The black Tesla Model S glided silently through the streets of Millbrook, its tinted windows reflecting the autumn sun that cast long shadows across the familiar neighborhood. Marcus Chen adjusted his Armani suit jacket and checked his Rolex 3:47 p.m. Perfect timing. He pulled into the visitor parking lot of Jefferson Elementary School, the same cracked asphalt where he'd once waited for his mother to pick him up, usually the last kid standing with scraped knees and a backpack full of disappointing grades. The irony wasn't lost on him that he now drove a car worth more than most people's homes to visit the place where he'd been told he'd never amount to anything. The autumn wind carried the scent of fallen leaves and childhood memories as Marcus stepped out of his car. Students streamed from the building laughing, shouting, their voices echoing across the playground where he'd spent countless recesses alone, reading comic books under the old oak tree that still stood sentinel in the corner. His phone buzzed. A text from his assistant. Forbes interview confirmed for tomorrow at 2 p.m. Stock opened up 12% this morning. Congratulations, Mr. Chen. Marcus smiled, slipping the phone back into his pocket. At 28, he was the youngest person to ever grace the cover of Forbes' 30 Under 30 list for his revolutionary edtech company, LearnSphere, which had just gone public with a valuation of $2.8 billion, but none of that mattered right now. He was here for one reason. Mrs. Henderson, the woman who had looked a 10-year-old boy in the eyes and said the words that had haunted and motivated him for 18 years. Marcus, you need to face reality. Some children are simply not cut out for academic success. You'll never be anything more than average, and the sooner you accept that, the better. He'd carried those words like a splinter in his heart through middle school, high school, college, and every late night building his company from his garage. Every rejection letter, every failed pitch, every investor who'd laughed at his ideas, they'd all echoed Mrs. Henderson's voice. Today, that splinter would finally be removed. Marcus walked through the front doors of Jefferson Elementary, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the same worn linoleum floors. The walls were painted a cheerful yellow now instead of the institutional green he remembered. But the smell was identical disinfectant mixed with cafeteria food and that indefinable scent of childhood dreams. "Can I help you?" asked the receptionist. A young woman with kind eyes who couldn't have been much older than Marcus himself. "I'm here to see Mrs. Henderson," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the earthquake in his chest. "I'm a former student." The receptionist's face lit up. "Oh, how wonderful. She'd be so excited. She's just finishing up with her class. Room 15, down the hall and to the right. I'm sure she remembers you." "Oh, she remember me," Marcus thought as he made his way down the corridor, lined with colorful student artwork and motivational posters. One caught his eye. "Dream big, anything is possible." He paused outside room 15, hearing the familiar cadence of a teacher wrapping up the day's lessons. Through the small window in the door, he could see her, Mrs. Henderson, now with silver hair instead of the brown he remembered, but the same stern posture, the same way of holding her reading glasses. She was older, smaller somehow, but her voice carried the same authority that had once made him shrink in his seat. "Remember, class," she was saying, "not everyone can be exceptional. It's important to know your limitations and work within them. Some of you will go to college, others will find different paths. There's nothing wrong with being ordinary." Marcus's jaw tightened. 18 years later, and she was still crushing dreams. The bell rang, and students began filing out, chattering excitedly about weekend plans. Marcus stepped aside, watching their young faces full of possibility. How many of them would go home tonight carrying the weight of Mrs. Henderson's low expectations? When the last student had left, Marcus knocked on the door frame. Double quotes, "Mrs. Henderson?" She looked up from her desk, adjusting her glasses. For a moment, confusion flickered across her features, then recognition dawned slowly. "Marcus Chen," she said, setting down her red pen. "My goodness, what are you doing here?" He stepped into the classroom that had once felt like a prison. The desks were arranged the same way. The blackboard had been replaced by a smartboard. But the feeling was identical, that suffocating sense of being judged and found wanting. "I wanted to see you," Marcus said simply. Mrs. Henderson stood, smoothing her cardigan. She was smaller than he remembered, more fragile. The woman who had loomed so large in his childhood now barely came up to his shoulder. "Well," she said, clearly unsure how to handle this unexpected visit. "You look successful." Marcus almost laughed. Successful was an understatement. In the past 10 years, he'd built a company that was revolutionizing education technology, employed over 500 people, and had just been valued at nearly $3 billion. He owned homes in Silicon Valley, New York, and Tokyo. His net worth exceeded that of small countries. But standing in this classroom, facing this woman, he felt like that scared 10-year-old boy again. "I am successful," he said quietly. "I wanted you to know that." Something flickered in Mrs. Henderson's eyes, surprise, perhaps even a hint of pride. "That's wonderful, Marcus. I always knew you'd find your way eventually. What are you doing now?" "Always knew?" The words hit him like a physical blow. How could she say that when she'd been the one to tell him he'd never amount to anything? "I'm the founder and CEO of LearnSphere," Marcus said, watching her face carefully. "We just went public. The company is worth $2.8 billion. Mrs. Henderson blinked, clearly struggling to process this information. She sat down heavily in her chair. $2.8 billion? She repeated. "Billion," Marcus confirmed. "We're revolutionizing how children learn, especially those who struggle in traditional classroom settings. Children like I was." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken history. Mrs. Henderson stared at him as if seeing him for the first time. "Marcus, she began, then stopped. "Do you remember what you told me?" Marcus asked, his voice still controlled, but with an edge creeping in. "In this very classroom when I was 10 years old." Mrs. Henderson's face went pale. She opened her mouth, closed it, then shook her head slightly. "You told me I'd never be anything more than average," Marcus continued. "You said some children simply aren't cut out for academic success, and I was one of them." I don't remember saying that," she whispered, but her eyes said otherwise. The way she looked away, the slight tremor in her hands, she remembered. She remembered crushing a 10-year-old spirit with the casual cruelty of low expectations. Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a printout of the Forbes article about his company's IPO. He placed it gently on her desk. "I kept every newspaper clipping, every article written about me and my company," he said. "Not because I'm proud, I am proud, but because I wanted to remember. I wanted to remember what it felt like to be told I'd never be anything, so I could prove that voice wrong every single day." Mrs. Henderson stared at the article, her hands shaking slightly as she picked it up. The headline read, "From Classroom Failure to Billion-Dollar Success, How Marcus Chen's LearnSphere is Changing Education Forever." "I don't understand," she said finally. You struggled so much. Your grades were poor, you couldn't focus, you seemed so." She trailed off, perhaps realizing how damaging her words sounded. "Learning disabled?" Marcus supplied. "Different? Stupid?" "No, not stupid," she said quickly. "Just different, like you said." Marcus nodded. "I was different. I had ADHD, though we didn't know it then. I also had dyslexia, which wasn't diagnosed until high school. But you know what else I had?" Mrs. Henderson shook her head. "Ideas," Marcus said. "Creativity. A mind that worked differently than other kids. While they were memorizing multiplication tables, I was designing machines in my head. While they were reading chapter books, I was imagining new ways to solve problems." He gestured to the Forbes article in her hands. "LearnSphere exists because I understand what it's like to learn differently. We've helped over 2 million children who struggle in traditional classrooms find success. 2 million kids who might have been told they'd never amount to anything. Mrs. Henderson was crying now, silent tears streaming down her cheeks as she read the article. Marcus, if I said those things to you, I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. But you did, Marcus said, not unkindly. You hurt me deeply. But you also gave me something else, the burning desire to prove you wrong. He sat down in one of the small student chairs, looking oddly dignified despite being folded into furniture designed for children. I didn't come here to hurt you, he continued. I came here because I wanted you to understand something important. Words have power, especially when they come from teachers. You have the ability to plant seeds of possibility or weeds of limitation in young minds. I want you to choose more carefully. Mrs. Henderson set the article down and looked at him directly for the first time since he'd entered the room. How did you do it? She asked. How did you overcome? Overcome what? My learning differences? I didn't overcome them, I learned to work with them. I found mentors who believed in me, starting with my mother, who never let me believe your words were true. I found teachers in high school and college who saw potential instead of problems. Marcus stood up, smoothing his suit. I also had something else driving me, the absolute determination to prove that Mrs. Henderson was wrong about Marcus Chen. What do you think will happen next? Share your predictions in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling stories. As Marcus walked back to his car, his mind drifted to the journey that had brought him to this moment. The memories came flooding back like scenes from a movie he'd watched 1,000 times. After that devastating day in Mrs. Henderson's classroom, 10-year-old Marcus had gone home and cried into his pillow until his mother, Linda Chen, found him. Linda was a single mother working 2 jobs to make ends meet, cleaning office buildings at night and working as a seamstress during the day. She spoke English with a heavy Chinese accent, but her love for her son was fluent in any language. What? Wrong, Bobai? She had asked, using the Mandarin word for treasure. Through his tears, Marcus had told her what Mrs. Henderson had said. He watched his mother's face transform from concern to fury to fierce determination. That woman is wrong, Linda had said, her accent thickening with emotion. You are a special boy. You see things differently, think differently. This is not a bad thing, this gift. From that day forward, Linda Chen had become her son's fiercest advocate. She couldn't help him with homework. Her own education had ended at 6th grade in rural China, but she could do something more important. She could believe in him when he couldn't believe in himself. She had saved every penny to buy him a used computer when he was 12, sacrificing her own needs to give him tools for learning. She had driven him to the library every day after school, sitting quietly in the corner with her sewing, while he discovered the magic of programming and technology. When Marcus was 14, he had built his first app, a simple game that helped kids learn multiplication tables through visual patterns instead of rote memorization. It wasn't sophisticated, but it worked for him in a way traditional methods never had. His mother had been so proud she'd cried. You see, she had said, you help children learn, just like you wish someone would help you. High school had brought new challenges and new allies. Mrs. Sarah Williams, his sophomore English teacher, had recognized his dyslexia and helped him get proper testing and accommodations. Mr. James Rodriguez, his computer science teacher, had seen his potential and pushed him to enter programming competitions. But it was Dr. Patricia Nguyen, his AP history teacher, who had truly changed his life. Dr. Nguyen was young, energetic, and unorthodox in her teaching methods. She used multimedia, presentations, interactive discussions, and project-based learning instead of lecture and test formats. For the first time in his academic career, Marcus had not only passed a class, he had excelled. Marcus, Dr. Nguyen had said after class one day during his senior year, have you thought about studying education in college? The question had surprised him. Education? But I'm not good at school, Dr. Nguyen laughed. You're not good at traditional School. But you understand learning better than most teachers I know. You've had to find creative ways to absorb information your entire life. That's not a weakness, it's a superpower. She had been the one to encourage him to apply to Stanford, despite his mediocre GPA, his essay about overcoming learning disabilities, and his portfolio of educational software projects had gotten him in with a partial scholarship. College had been another battlefield, but Marcus had learned to choose his battles wisely. He'd struggled with lecture-heavy courses, but thrived in hands-on projects and lab work. His professors in the computer science and education departments had recognized his unique perspective on learning technology. It was during his junior year that the idea for LearnSphere had been born. Marcus had been tutoring elementary students to earn extra money when he'd met Jamie, an 8-year-old boy who reminded him painfully of himself. Jamie was bright, creative, and full of questions, but he was failing 3rd grade because he couldn't sit still long enough to complete traditional assignments. "I hate school," Jamie had confided during one of their sessions. "My teacher says I don't pay attention, but I do. I just see things differently than other kids." That night, Marcus had stayed up until dawn, sketching out the framework for an adaptive learning platform that would adjust to different learning styles and attention spans. Instead of forcing children to conform to rigid educational formats, the software would mold itself to each child's unique needs. He'd spent his senior year developing the prototype, living on ramen noodles and energy drinks, coding until his eyes burned. His mother had worried about his health, but she'd never stopped believing in his vision. "You're building something important," she'd said during one of their weekly phone calls. "You help children like you were helped. This could work, Marcus." After graduation, he'd moved back home and set up shop in his mother's garage, much to the amusement of their neighbors. The early days of LearnSphere had been brutal 18-hour workdays, countless rejections from investors, and moments when he'd questioned whether Mrs. Henderson had been right after all. The breakthrough had come when Dr. Nguyen, now a principal, herself had agreed to pilot LearnSphere in her elementary school. The results had been stunning. Test scores improved across the board. But more importantly, students reported feeling more engaged and confident in their learning. Armed with this data, Marcus had finally landed his first investor, a venture capital firm specializing in education technology. The initial funding had allowed him to hire a small team and refine the platform, but it was the second major milestone that had truly vindicated his belief in the power of different kinds of minds. LearnSphere had been selected for a large-scale study by the Department of Education, comparing traditional teaching methods with adaptive learning technology across 500 schools nationwide. The results had been published in the Journal of Educational Psychology and picked up by major media outlets. LearnSphere's approach had shown a 34% improvement in reading comprehension and a 42% improvement in math scores among students with learning disabilities. More importantly, student engagement and self-confidence had skyrocketed. That study had opened the floodgates. School districts across the country wanted to implement LearnSphere's technology. International markets beckoned. The company had grown from Marcus and 3 employees in his garage to a team of 500 across multiple offices. And through it all, he'd carried Mrs. Henderson's words like a talisman, a reminder of why this work mattered. Now, as he sat in his Tesla outside Jefferson Elementary, Marcus realized that his journey hadn't really been about proving Mrs. Henderson wrong. It had been about proving that difference didn't mean deficient, that struggling in traditional systems didn't predict future failure, and that every child deserved to have someone believe in their potential. His phone rang, interrupting his reverie. The caller ID showed his mother's number. "Mend," he answered, using the Mandarin word for mother. "Marcus, I see news about your company on television. They say you are a billionaire now." Marcus smiled. His mother still lived in the same small house where he'd grown up, despite his offers to buy her a mansion. She preferred her garden and her neighborhood friends to the isolation of wealth. Not quite a billionaire, MD, but we're doing well. So proud of you, Bobai. You remember what I always tell you? That I'm special because I see things differently. Marcus recited the words she'd told him countless times over the years. Exactly. And now you help other children see they are special too. This is good work. This is important work. After hanging up, Marcus sat for a moment longer, watching students being picked up by their parents. Some looked excited, chattering about their day. Others seemed tired or frustrated, dragging backpacks that looked too heavy for their small shoulders. He wondered how many of them were like he'd been struggling to fit into educational molds that weren't designed for their unique minds. How many of them would go home tonight feeling stupid or inadequate because they learned differently than their classmates? His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. Reminder, board meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. Also, NBC wants to schedule an interview about the IPO. Marcus typed back, schedule the NBC interview, but I want to add a condition. I want to film a segment at an elementary school, showing LearnSphere in action with students who struggle in traditional settings. As he drove away from Jefferson Elementary, Marcus felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The conversation with Mrs. Henderson hadn't gone exactly as he'd imagined over the years, but it had served its purpose. He'd closed a chapter of his past and opened a new one, not just for himself, but for the millions of children who would benefit from his company's technology. But as he pulled onto the highway, Marcus had no idea that his visit to Jefferson Elementary was about to set off a chain of events that would test everything he'd built and force him to confront challenges far greater than Mrs. Henderson's low expectations. In her classroom, Mrs. Henderson sat alone, staring at the Forbes article and wrestling with memories she'd tried to forget. And in the principal's office, a phone call was being made that would change everything. The real thriller was just beginning. 3 weeks after his visit to Jefferson Elementary, Marcus stood in the floor-to-ceiling windows of his San Francisco office, watching the morning fog roll across the bay. The LearnSphere headquarters occupied 2 full floors of a gleaming tech building in Soma, complete with meditation rooms, a full cafeteria, and an arcade where employees could unwind between coding sessions. It was a far cry from his mother's garage, but Marcus had insisted on maintaining the company's core mission, making learning accessible for every child, regardless of how their mind worked. Marcus? His assistant David knocked on the open door of his office. The NBC crew is here for the interview setup. Marcus nodded, straightening his tie. The segment was set to air on the evening news featuring LearnSphere's revolutionary approach to education and its impact on children with learning differences. They'd filmed at Roosevelt Elementary the day before, capturing footage of students using the platform with remarkable results. Send them in, Marcus said. The news crew bustled in with their equipment, transforming his minimalist office into a television studio. The reporter, Janet Chen, no relation, despite the shared surname, was a veteran journalist known for her insightful business reporting. Mr. Chen, she said, shaking his hand firmly. Congratulations on the IPO. Your story is truly inspiring. Thank you, Marcus replied, settling into his chair as the camera operator adjusted the lighting. Though I hope people understand this isn't just about one person's success. It's about changing how we view learning differences. The interview began with standard questions about the company's growth, the technology behind LearnSphere, and the market opportunities in educational technology. Marcus fielded them with practiced ease, but he could tell Janet was building toward something more substantial. Let's talk about your personal journey, Janet said, leaning forward slightly. You've been very open about your own learning disabilities and how they shaped your approach to education. Can you tell us about a specific moment that drove you to create LearnSphere? Marcus had told this story dozens of times, but he never tired of it. When I was 10 years old, A teacher told me I'd never amount to anything more than average. She said some children simply aren't cut out for academic success. Janet's eyebrows rose slightly. That must have been devastating for a child to hear. It was, Marcus admitted. But it also became my motivation. Every time I faced a setback, and there were many, I remembered those words and used them as fuel to keep going. Have you ever confronted that teacher about what she said? Marcus paused, choosing his words carefully. Actually, yes. I visited Jefferson Elementary School a few weeks ago and spoke with Mrs. Henderson. And how did that conversation go? It was ... closure, Marcus said simply. I think she understood the impact of her words, and I hope it will make her more thoughtful about how she speaks to struggling students in the future. The interview continued for another 20 minutes, covering LearnSphere's expansion plans and Marcus's philanthropic efforts. As the crew packed up their equipment, Janet lingered behind. Off the record, she said quietly, I'm working on a broader piece about education and the treatment of children with learning differences. Would you be willing to speak more extensively about your experiences? Marcus considered this. What kind of piece? An investigative feature. I've been hearing troubling stories about teachers and administrators who still operate under outdated assumptions about learning disabilities. Your story could help highlight the need for change. Before Marcus could respond, David burst into the office, his face pale. Marcus, we have a problem, a serious problem. Janet's journalistic instincts kicked in immediately. I should go, she said, gathering her things. Actually, Marcus said, something cold settling in his stomach. You might want to stay for this. David, what's happening? David glanced nervously at Janet, then back at Marcus. There's a video going viral on social media. It's about you. Marcus felt the world tilt slightly. What kind of video? Someone recorded your conversation with Mrs. Henderson, David said. The whole thing. They posted it with the caption, Billionaire humiliates elderly teacher. It's been shared over 1 million times in the past hour. The blood drained from Marcus's face. That's impossible. We were alone in her classroom. Apparently, one of the custodial staff was cleaning nearby and overheard. They filmed through the window, David said, pulling out his phone. Marcus, people are furious. They're saying you're a bully who attacked a defenseless old woman. Marcus watched in horror as David played the video. The angle was poor, the audio slightly muffled, but it was clearly him confronting Mrs. Henderson. Worse, without the context of their history. It looked exactly like what people were saying, a wealthy, powerful man intimidating an elderly teacher. The comments were brutal. Typical rich guy with an ego problem. She's just a teacher doing her job. This is disgusting. Someone needs to humble this billionaire brat. Hope his company tanks after this. Janet Chen had pulled out her own phone and was scrolling through social media. Marcus, she said softly. This is bad, really bad. The hashtag bully billionaire is trending nationwide. Marcus sank into his chair, his mind racing. How had a moment of personal closure turned into a public relations nightmare? David, get our communications team on this immediately, he said. We need a statement that provides context. Already tried, David said. They're saying any response. Right now will just fuel the fire. People are too angry to listen to explanations. Marcus's phone began buzzing incessantly with calls from board members, investors, and reporters. Through his window, he could see news vans pulling up outside the building. Mr. Chen, Janet said carefully, I'd like to offer you an opportunity to tell your side of the story. A full interview where you can provide the complete context of what happened in that classroom. Marcus looked at her, recognizing both the lifeline and the potential trap. And if I refuse? Then the narrative gets written without your voice, she said bluntly. And right now, that narrative is not favorable. Before Marcus could respond, his phone rang with a call he couldn't ignore. His mother. Marcus, Linda Chen's voice was shaky. People saying terrible things about you on television. They say you hurt an old lady. This is not true, right? No, Mangdi, Marcus said, his heart breaking at the worry in her voice. It's not true. It's complicated, but I didn't hurt anyone. Good, she said firmly. Then you tell the truth. You always tell the truth, Marcus. Truth wins in the end. As he hung up, Marcus realized his mother was right. The truth was all he had, and it was all he'd ever needed. Janet, he said, turning to the reporter, let's schedule that interview. But even as he said the words, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was just beginning. The viral video was more than just a PR crisis. It was threatening to destroy everything he'd built and, worse, to undermine the mission he'd dedicated his life to. That evening, as protesters gathered outside LearnSphere's headquarters chanting, "Down with bully billionaire," Marcus worked late into the night with his crisis management team. The company's stock price had dropped 15% in after-hours trading, and several school districts were threatening to cancel their contracts with LearnSphere. But the worst news came at midnight, in a phone call from his head of security, Marcus. The man said, his voice grim, "We've received credible threats against you and your mother. I'm recommending increased security immediately." As Marcus stared out at the protesters below, their signs and chants illuminated by streetlights, he realized that Mrs. Henderson's words might finally come true, not because he lacked ability, but because the court of public opinion was about to destroy everything he'd worked for. The boy who had once been told he'd never amount to anything was about to learn that success could be taken away just as quickly as it was earned. The death threats started arriving. At 3 a.m. Marcus sat in his office, surrounded by security personnel and crisis management consultants, reading printouts of the most disturbing messages. They ranged from crude insults to detailed descriptions of violence that made his security team recommend he leave San Francisco immediately. "This is beyond normal social media backlash," said Jennifer Walsh, his head of communications. "Someone is organizing this campaign. The timing, the coordinated nature of the attacks, this isn't organic outrage." Marcus looked up from the stack of threats. "What do you mean?" Jennifer pulled up several screens on her laptop. "Look at the pattern." The viral video was posted by an account created just 3 days ago. The most inflammatory comments and shares are coming from accounts with suspicious activity patterns. And the hashtag bully billionaire was being promoted by both networks before the video even went viral. "You're saying this was planned?" Marcus asked, a chill running down his spine. "I'm saying someone wanted to destroy your reputation, and they used your visit to Jefferson Elementary as the perfect opportunity." David burst into the office without knocking, something he'd never done in 5 years of working for Marcus. "We have a bigger problem," he announced, his face grim. "NBC just called. They're killing the positive interview Janet Chen conducted yesterday. Instead, they're running an investigative piece tonight about LearnSphere's business practices." Marcus felt the walls closing in. What kind of investigative piece? "They're calling it the dark side of EdTech. Apparently they found former employees willing to claim that LearnSphere manipulates data to make its effectiveness appear better than it actually is." Jennifer cursed under her breath. "This is a coordinated attack. Someone has been planning this for weeks, maybe months." Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Enjoying your 15 minutes of fame. This is just the beginning. You should have stayed in your garage." He showed the message to his security chief, a former FBI agent named Robert Torres. "We're tracing all threats," Torres said, "but whoever's behind this knows how to cover their tracks. I'm recommending we move you to a secure location while we investigate." "I'm not running," Marcus said firmly. "If someone wants to destroy my company, they'll have to do it while I'm fighting back." At that moment, Janet Chen called Marcus's direct line. "Marcus," she said without preamble, I think we're both being played. My producers just informed me that the investigative piece about your company is running tonight, based on sources they claim are unimpeachable. But something doesn't feel right. What do you mean? The timing is too convenient. And the sources came to us, we didn't find them. In investigative journalism, that's usually a red flag. Marcus felt a flicker of hope. Are you willing to help us figure out what's really going on? I'm a journalist, Janet said. Getting to the truth is what I do. But I need full access to your company's data and financials to verify or debunk these claims. Marcus looked around. The room had his team people who had believed in his vision and worked tirelessly to build something meaningful. The thought of their work being destroyed by lies was unbearable. You'll have whatever you need, he said. Over the next 6 hours, Marcus's headquarters transformed into a war room. Janet Chen and her research team worked alongside LearnSphere's data scientists, combing through years of performance metrics and academic studies. Marcus's legal team prepared responses to the accusations, while his security team traced the origins of the viral video and the threatening messages. The break came at 2 p.m., just 3 hours before NBC's investigative piece was scheduled to air. Marcus, Janet called from across the room, you need to see this. She had connected her laptop to the large conference room screen, displaying a complex web of financial connections. I followed the money trail on the fake social media accounts, she said. They were all funded through a series of shell companies, but I was able to trace them back to their source. The name on the screen made Marcus's blood run cold. Pinnacle Education Systems. That's our biggest competitor, David said, stating the obvious. But look who's behind Pinnacle, Janet continued. Clicking through several more screens, Marcus stared at the final connection in disbelief. The majority shareholder in Pinnacle Education Systems was Dr. Richard Blackstone, a man he'd encountered during his college years, his former professor who had tried to sabotage his senior project and steal his ideas for LearnSphere. Blackstone. Marcus whispered, memories flooding back. Dr. Blackstone had been his advisor during his senior year at Stanford, initially supportive of Marcus's adaptive learning platform concept. But when it became clear that the project could be commercially viable, Blackstone had tried to claim ownership of the intellectual property, arguing that it had been developed under his guidance using university resources. The legal battle had been brutal for a 22-year-old college student. Marcus had nearly dropped out, overwhelmed by the stress and legal fees. Only the intervention of Dr. Nguyen, who testified about Marcus's original work, had saved his project. Blackstone had left Stanford shortly after, claiming he'd been unfairly persecuted. Marcus had assumed the man had moved on with his life. Apparently, he'd been planning his revenge instead. There's more, Janet said grimly. I contacted some of the former employees who made accusations against LearnSphere. Turns out, 3 of them never actually worked for your company. They're actors, hired through a casting agency that's also connected to Pinnacle Education Systems. Jennifer Walsh looked up from her phone. And I just confirmed that the custodian who filmed your conversation with Mrs. Henderson was paid $50,000 by a private investigator working for Pinnacle Education Systems. Marcus finished. The room fell silent as the enormity of the conspiracy became clear. This wasn't just a competitor trying to damage LearnSphere's reputation. It was a systematic, years-long campaign of industrial espionage and character assassination. We need to get this information to NBC immediately, David said. Janet shook her head. It's too late to stop tonight's broadcast. The piece is already edited and ready to air. But we can use this evidence to demand equal time for a rebuttal. Marcus stood up, pacing to the window where protesters still chanted outside. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd returned to his elementary school to confront his past, only to discover that his past had been waiting to destroy his future. No, he said suddenly, turning back to the room. We're not going to play defense anymore. Janet, Can you put together an investigation of your own? I want the full story of Blackstone's campaign exposed. That will take time, Janet warned. And NBC isn't going to like being scooped by their own reporter. Then we'll find another outlet, Marcus said. The truth is worth fighting for, even if it costs me everything. At 5 p.m., NBC's investigative piece aired nationwide. Marcus watched from his office as his company's reputation was systematically destroyed on national television. The fake employees made their accusations with convincing emotion. Selective. Data was presented to make LearnSphere's results appear fraudulent. And through it all, the viral video of his confrontation with Mrs. Henderson played on repeat, painting him as an arrogant billionaire who bullied defenseless educators. By 6 p.m., LearnSphere's stock price had plummeted 40%. By 7 p.m., 3 major school districts had announced they were suspending their contracts pending investigation. By 8 p.m., Marcus's own board of directors was calling an emergency meeting to discuss his removal as CEO. Marcus wasn't watching the financial carnage anymore. He was studying the evidence Janet had compiled, looking for patterns that might reveal more about Blackstone's network. Marcus Torres, his security chief, approached with a grim expression. We've traced the source of the death threats. They're coming from the same network that's been coordinating the social media attacks. Blackstone's people? It looks that way. But there's something else. We intercepted communication suggesting they're planning something bigger than just destroying your reputation. Marcus looked up sharply. What kind of something bigger? We're not sure yet, but the phrases final phase and complete destruction keep appearing in encrypted messages we've managed to decode. The tension is building. If you're enjoying this story, hit that like button and let me know in the comments which character you're rooting for. Your support helps me create more incredible stories like this one. That night, Marcus made a decision that would either save his company or destroy it completely. Instead of attending the emergency board meeting designed to oust him, he decided to go on the offensive. He called an impromptu press conference for the next morning, giving his communications team just 8 hours to prepare what they were calling the full truth presentation. This is extremely risky, Jennifer warned as they worked through the night. If we're wrong about any of this evidence, you'll be finished. If we do nothing, I'm finished anyway, Marcus replied, reviewing the presentation slides for the 10th time. At least this way, we control the narrative. Janet Chen had worked through the night as well, verifying every piece of evidence, cross-referencing financial records, and building an ironclad case against Blackstone's conspiracy. She'd also made a crucial discovery. Marcus, she said, exhaustion evident in her voice. I found something else. Blackstone hasn't just been targeting you. He's been systematically sabotaging other educational technology companies for the past 5 years. We're talking about a pattern of corporate espionage, fraud, and market manipulation. How many companies? At least 7 that I can prove. All of them were smaller startups with innovative approaches to learning differences. All of them were destroyed by sudden scandals and negative publicity campaigns. Marcus felt sick. How many brilliant innovations had been lost? How many children had been denied better educational tools because of one man's greed and vindictiveness? We're going to stop him, Marcus said with quiet determination. The press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m. at LearnSphere's headquarters. Despite the controversy, or perhaps because of it, every major news outlet sent representatives. Marcus had specifically requested that Mrs. Henderson be invited, though he wasn't sure she would come. At 9:55 a.m., Marcus stood behind the makeshift podium in LearnSphere's main conference room, looking out at a sea of skeptical faces. Cameras rolled, reporters held their phones aloft, and the future of his company hung in the balance. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus began, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. 3 days ago, a video went viral showing me in conversation with my former elementary school teacher. That video has been used to paint me as a bully, and to attack my company's credibility. Today, I want to tell you the full truth." He clicked to his first slide, showing the timeline of events leading up to his visit to Jefferson Elementary. I didn't go to see Mrs. Henderson to humiliate her. I went to find closure for words that had shaped my entire life. When I was 10 years old, struggling with undiagnosed learning disabilities, she told me I would never amount to anything more than average. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Marcus continued. Those words hurt, but they also motivated me to prove that children who learn differently aren't less capable, they're differently capable. That belief became the foundation of LearnSphere. He clicked to the next slide, showing LearnSphere's impact data. Over the past 7 years, our platform has helped 2.3 million students improve their academic performance. But more importantly, it's helped them believe in themselves. We have letters from thousands of parents whose children went from hating school to loving learning. Marcus paused, scanning the room. But someone doesn't want you to hear those success stories. Someone has spent considerable time and money trying to destroy not just my reputation, but the company that serves these children. The next series of slides laid out the evidence Janet had uncovered: the fake social media accounts, the paid actors posing as former employees, the financial connections to Pinnacle education systems, and the pattern of attacks on other educational technology companies. Dr. Richard Blackstone, the CEO of Pinnacle Education Systems, has been running a systematic campaign to eliminate competition in the educational technology market. He's not just trying to hurt me personally, he's trying to control how children learn. The room erupted in questions, but Marcus held up his hand. I know this sounds like a conspiracy theory, so I've invited someone here who can verify the most important part of this story. The conference room doors opened, and Mrs. Henderson walked in, looking small and nervous but determined. The room fell silent. Marcus stepped aside as she approached the microphone. "My name is Eleanor Henderson," she said, her voice shaky but clear. "I taught elementary school for 42 years before retiring last month. Mr. Chen came to see me 3 weeks ago, and I want to tell you what really happened in that conversation." She looked directly at the cameras. "When Marcus was my student, I failed him. Not because he was incapable, but because I didn't understand how to teach children who learn differently. I said things to him that I've regretted for 18 years. Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "When he came to see me, he wasn't cruel or bullying. He was hurt, and he had every right to be. But do you know what he did? He forgave me. And then he told me about all the children his company has helped children, just like he was." Mrs. Henderson pulled out a letter from her purse. "After our conversation, I did some research on LearnSphere. This is a letter from a parent who's dyslexic. Daughter went from failing 3rd grade to excelling in 5th grade using Marcus's platform. This is just one of thousands of similar letters." She folded the letter carefully and looked back at the cameras. "I was wrong about Marcus Chen when he was 10 years old, and I was wrong to feel defensive when he confronted me about it. But the people attacking him now are making the same mistake I made judging someone without understanding their true purpose." The room was dead silent as Mrs. Henderson returned to her seat. Marcus stepped back to the microphone. "Mrs. Henderson didn't have to come here today," he said softly. "She could have stayed home and let this controversy pass her by. But she came because she understands what's really at stake here: the future of how we educate children who don't fit traditional molds." Marcus clicked to his final slide, showing photos of children using LearnSphere in classrooms around the world. Dr. Blackstone's campaign isn't just about destroying my company. It's about maintaining an educational status quo that fails millions of children every year. He's willing to use lies, manipulation, and even threats of violence to preserve a system that profits from keeping innovative solutions out of reach. He paused, letting that sink in. "I built LearnSphere because I believe every child deserves to discover their potential, regardless of how their mind works. I won't let anyone destroy that mission, no matter how powerful they are or how dirty they're willing to fight. The press conference erupted in questions. Reporters shouted over each other, cameras flashed, and the story that had seemed so simple just hours earlier suddenly became incredibly complex. But Marcus's real surprise came after the formal Q&A ended. As reporters filed out, debating what they'd heard, Chen approached him with her phone in hand. "Marcus," she said, her eyes bright with excitement, "I just got a call from a federal prosecutor. They've been investigating Pinnacle Education. Systems for market manipulation. Your evidence just gave them everything they needed to file criminal charges." 2 weeks later, Marcus sat in a federal courthouse, watching as Dr. Richard Blackstone was led away in handcuffs. The man who had tried to destroy his life and company looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of the evidence against him. The FBI investigation had moved with remarkable speed once Marcus's evidence provided the missing pieces of their puzzle. Blackstone's network of corporate espionage had been even more extensive than anyone had imagined, involving not just educational technology companies, but several other industries as well. "It's over," Chen said, settling into the seat beside Marcus as the courtroom emptied. Her investigative series on Blackstone's conspiracy had won her a Peabody Award nomination and had sparked congressional hearings on corporate sabotage. In the technology sector, "This part is over," Marcus corrected. "But the real work is just beginning." In the 2 weeks since his press conference, LearnSphere's stock price had not only recovered, but had reached new highs. School districts that had canceled their contracts were calling to reinstate them. More importantly, the publicity had brought attention to the broader issues of learning differences and educational innovation. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "Saw news on television. Very proud of you for fighting for truth. Come home for dinner tonight. I will make your favorite dumplings." Despite everything he'd been through, that simple invitation made him smile. Some things never changed, and that was exactly as it should. As Marcus left the courthouse, he was surprised to see a familiar figure waiting by his car, Mrs. Henderson, looking more confident than he'd ever seen her. "Mrs. Henderson," he said, approaching her with genuine warmth. "What are you doing here?" "I wanted to see this through to the end," she said. "And I wanted to ask you something." Marcus waited patiently. "I've been reading about your company's teacher training programs," she continued. "I know I'm retired, but I was wondering if there might be a place for an old teacher who's finally ready to learn new ways of helping children." Marcus felt a profound sense of completion. The woman who had once told him he'd never amount to anything was now asking to join his mission to help children who learned differently. Double quotes, "Mrs. Henderson," he said. "I think that would be perfect." 1 year later, Marcus stood in the renovated auditorium of Jefferson Elementary School, watching as Mrs. Henderson demonstrated LearnSphere's adaptive learning platform to a room full of educators. The same woman who had once crushed his dreams was now one of the company's most effective advocates for inclusive education. "The key," Mrs. Henderson was telling the assembled teachers, "is to remember that different doesn't mean deficient. These children aren't broken, our methods are just incomplete." Marcus smiled, remembering when those words would have seemed impossible coming from her lips. The past year had been transformative for LearnSphere. The publicity from the Blackstone scandal had led to partnerships with major educational institutions around the world. The company had expanded beyond learning disabilities to serve gifted students, English language learners, and children in underserved communities. But the moment Marcus was most proud of had come 6 months earlier, when LearnSphere launched its Teacher Transformation Initiative, a program that helped veteran educators adapt their methods to serve diverse learners. Mrs. Henderson had been their first volunteer. "Mr. Chen?" A small voice interrupted his thoughts. Marcus looked down to see a young boy, perhaps 8 years old, tugging on his sleeve. The child looked remarkably like Marcus had at that age, slightly disheveled, carrying a backpack that seemed too big for his frame, and wearing an expression of cautious curiosity. "Yes?" Marcus said, kneeling down to the boy's level. "My teacher says you used to be like me," the boy said quietly. "That you had trouble in school, but you grew up to be successful anyway." Marcus felt his heart clench. "What's your name?" "Tommy," the boy said, "and I'm not very good at reading. Sometimes the other kids laugh at me." Marcus looked into Tommy's eyes and saw his younger self scared, confused but still hopeful that someone might understand. "Tommy," Marcus said gently, "can I tell you a secret?" The boy nodded eagerly. "Having trouble with reading doesn't mean you're not smart. It just means your brain works differently. And sometimes the most amazing inventions come from brains that work differently." "Really? Really?" "In fact, I have a special computer program that might help you with reading. Would you like to try it?" Tommy's face lit up with excitement. As Marcus led the boy to one of the demonstration stations, he caught Mrs. Henderson's eye across the room. She smiled and nodded approvingly. Later that evening, Marcus drove through the streets of his old neighborhood, marveling at how different everything looked now that success had changed his perspective. The same streets that had once seemed to trap him now felt like the foundation of his journey. He pulled into his mother's driveway, where Chen was tending to her garden in the fading sunlight. At 65, she remained fiercely independent, though Marcus had finally convinced her to let him hire a housekeeper to help with the heavier chores. "Bye-bye," she said, looking up from her tomato plants. "How was the presentation?" "Good," Marcus said, settling onto the porch steps beside her. "Mrs. Henderson is becoming quite the advocate for our programs." Linda nodded sagely. "People can change when they see the truth clearly. She is a good woman who made mistakes. Now she has fixed the mistake." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sun set over the neighborhood where Marcus had grown up feeling like a failure. "Mund," Marcus said finally, "do you remember what you told me the day Mrs. Henderson said I'd never amount to anything?" "I tell you that woman was wrong," Linda replied immediately. "I tell you that you were a special boy who saw things differently." "You saved my life that day," Marcus said quietly. "If you hadn't believed in me, ... Linda Chen reached over and patted her son's hand with soil-stained fingers. "I will not save your life, Marcus. I just remind you who you really were. You saved your own life. And now you save the lives of many other children, too." Marcus's phone buzzed with a notification from LearnSphere's Learning Analytics dashboard. Somewhere in the world, a child who had been struggling with traditional learning methods had just completed their first successful lesson using the adaptive platform. It was a small victory, but Marcus had learned that small victories, accumulated over time, could change everything. As he looked out over the neighborhood where he'd once been told he'd never amount to anything, Marcus Chen felt a deep sense of peace. The boy who had been dismissed as average had grown into a man who was helping millions of children discover that there was no such thing as average, only different ways of being extraordinary. His phone rang, displaying the number for Roosevelt Elementary School, where Tommy attended classes. "Mr. Chen," came the excited voice of Tommy's teacher. "I had to call you. Tommy just read an entire book using your program. It's the first book he's ever finished by himself. He's so proud, and frankly, so am I." Marcus smiled, watching his mother carefully tend to each plant in her garden, nurturing growth in her own quiet way. "That's wonderful," he said. "Please tell Tommy that I'm proud of him too. And remind him that this is just the beginning." As he ended the call, Marcus realized that Mrs. Henderson had been wrong about more than just his potential. She'd said some children simply weren't cut out for academic success, but the truth was simpler and more profound. Some children just needed different keys to unlock the same doors, and Marcus Chen had dedicated his life to making sure every child got their key, 5 years after his confrontation with Mrs. Henderson, Marcus stood before the United Nations Educational Committee in Geneva, Switzerland. LearnSphere has grown from a garage startup to a global educational platform serving over 50 million students in 120 countries. Education is not about forcing children to fit into predetermined molds, Marcus told the Assembly of Education Ministers and Policymakers. It's about creating environments where every type of mind can flourish. In the audience, he spotted a familiar face, Dr. Patricia Nguyen, his former high school teacher, who had first encouraged him to pursue education. She now served as the UN's Special Rapporteur on Inclusive Education and had been instrumental in bringing Marcus to speak at this summit. After his presentation, Dr. Nguyen approached him in the corridor outside the assembly hall. "Marcus," she said, embracing him warmly, "I always knew you'd change the world. I just didn't realize the scale you had in mind." "I had good teachers," Marcus replied. "They helped me see that what made me different was actually what made me valuable." "Speaking of teachers," Dr. Nguyen said with a mysterious smile, "I have something to show you." She pulled out her phone and showed him a video message. On the screen was Mrs. Henderson, now 72 years old, but with eyes bright with purpose. "Marcus," Mrs. Henderson said in the recording, "I wanted you to know that next month, I'll be traveling to Kenya to help train teachers in rural schools to use LearnSphere's platform. 40 years ago, I thought teaching meant having all the answers. Now, I know it means being willing to learn alongside your students." The video continued. "I also wanted to tell you about something wonderful. Remember Tommy, the little boy you met at Jefferson Elementary? He's in high school now, and he just won the state science fair with a project about adaptive learning technologies. He says he wants to be an inventor like you when he grows up." Marcus felt tears welling in his eyes as Mrs. Henderson concluded, "I spent 40 years as a teacher, but I learned more about education in the past 5 years working with your company than in all my previous decades combined. Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to become the teacher your students deserve." Dr. Nguyen put her hand on Marcus's shoulder. "She's not the same woman who crushed a 10-year-old's dreams." "No," Marcus agreed, "but then again, I'm not the same 10-year-old either." That evening, Marcus walked along Lake Geneva, reflecting on the impossible journey that had brought him to this moment. His phone buzzed with updates from LearnSphere's global operations, a new partnership with the Ministry of Education in Brazil, breakthrough results from their autism support program in Japan, and a message from his team that their latest funding round had raised enough money to provide free access to underserved communities worldwide. But the notification that made him smile the most was a simple email from Tommy Martinez, now 17 years old. "Mr. Chen, I just got accepted to MIT for engineering. My admissions essay was about how learning differences aren't disabilities, they're superpowers waiting to be discovered. Thank you for helping me find mine. P.S. Mrs. Henderson says hi, and that she's proud of both of us." Marcus called his mother from his hotel room that night, as he did every evening no matter where in the world his work took him. I have good news," he said when she answered. "You always have good news, Babobai. What is it today?" "The UN is adopting LearnSphere's inclusive learning framework as a global standard. By 2030, every child in the world will have access to education that adapts to how their mind works." Linda Chung was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "You remember what I told you when you were a small boy crying about what the teacher said? You told me I was special because I saw things differently." "No," his mother corrected gently. "I tell you that being different was a gift. But I also tell you that gift not meant to be kept for yourself, gift meant to share." Marcus looked out his hotel window at the lights of Geneva reflecting on the lake. "I remember Monday." "Good. Then you understand that your real success is not the money or the fame. Your real success is that you help other children see their gifts too." After hanging up, Marcus opened his laptop and began writing his next blog post for LearnSphere's education advocacy platform. 10 years ago, I returned to my elementary school to confront a teacher who had told me I'd never amount to anything. I thought I was seeking closure for my past. Instead, I discovered the blueprint for my future. Mrs. Henderson was wrong about my potential, but she was right about one thing: I was different. The mistake she made wasn't in recognizing my differences, but in believing that difference meant deficient. Today, LearnSphere serves 50 million students worldwide, and every single one of them is different. They're different in how they process information, how they express creativity, how they solve problems, and how they see the world. And that's exactly what makes them extraordinary. If you're reading this and you've ever been told you're not smart enough, not focused enough, or simply not enough, I want you to know that those words say nothing about your potential and everything about the limitations of whoever spoke them. You are not broken. You are not less than. You are simply different, and the world needs exactly the kind of difference that you are. Keep going. Keep learning. Keep believing in the impossible. Your differences are not obstacles to overcome. They are superpowers to embrace. Marcus posted the blog entry and watched as comments immediately began pouring in from students, parents, and teachers around the world. Each message represented a life touched by the belief that every mind was valuable, every learning style was valid, and every child deserved to discover their unique gifts. As he prepared for bed, Marcus thought about the 10-year-old boy who had walked out of Mrs. Henderson's classroom, believing he would never amount to anything. That boy could never have imagined that his greatest weakness would become his greatest strength, or that the words meant to crush his spirit would ultimately become the foundation for helping millions of other children discover theirs. The last thing Marcus did before falling asleep was read a message from the LearnSphere team, India, where they just completed training for teachers in remote villages. One teacher had written, "Today I learned that there is no such thing as a slow learner, only a learner who needs a different path to the same destination." Marcus smiled in the darkness. Mrs. Henderson had been wrong about him, but she'd been absolutely right about one thing. He had finally amounted to something. He'd amounted to hope. What did you think of this thrilling journey? Share your favorite moment in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss our latest tailies. What kind of story would you like to hear next? Dr. Marcus Chen, now 48 years old and a Nobel laureate for his contributions to global education, stood in the newly constructed Marcus and Linda Chen Center for Innovative Learning at Jefferson Elementary School. The building, funded by his foundation, housed state-of-the-art, adaptive learning labs and teacher training facilities. On the wall hung a photograph from the center's dedication ceremony 5 years earlier. In it, an elderly Mrs. Henderson, then 77, cut the ribbon alongside Marcus and his mother. The inscription beneath read, "Where different minds discover their extraordinary potential." Mrs. Henderson had passed away peacefully 2 years ago, but not before seeing her final dream realized: a global network of Henderson Fellows, teachers trained in her transformation methodology, working in schools across 6 continents. "Papa," called a voice from across the room. Marcus turned to see his 8-year-old daughter, Maya, running toward him with a tablet in her hands. She had inherited his learning differences, but also his innovative spirit, and she moved through the world with the confidence of a child who had never been told she was anything less than amazing. "Look what I built," Maya said excitedly, showing him a complex coding project she'd completed using LearnSphere's latest programming module for children. "That's incredible, Maya," Marcus said, kneeling down to examine her work. "Tell me how it works." As his daughter enthusiastically explained her creation, Marcus noticed Tommy Martinez, now Dr. Martinez, LearnSphere's Chief Innovation Officer, approaching with a group of visitors. "Marcus," Tommy said, I'd like you to meet some special guests." The group consisted of children from around the world who had been selected for LearnSphere's Global Innovation Fellowship, a program that brought together young minds who learned differently to collaborate on solutions to world challenges. "Mr. Chen," said a 12-year-old girl with a slight accent, "I'm Priya from Mumbai. I have dyslexia, just like you did. Using your platform, I invented a new way to teach reading through music. It's already helping thousands of children. It's already helping thousands of children. My city." A 10-year-old boy stepped forward next. "I'm Sam from Nigeria. I have ADHD, and everyone said I couldn't focus on anything. But your program helped me discover that I can focus on everything, which is actually a superpower for solving complex problems." Marcus listened as each child shared their story, seeing reflections of his younger self in their eager faces and innovative ideas. They were living proof that the mission he'd started in his mother's garage had grown beyond anything he could have imagined. After the children left for their next activity, Marcus walked to the window overlooking the playground where he'd once sat alone under the oak tree. The tree was still there, but now it was surrounded by children of all kinds, some in wheelchairs, some using sign language, some reading quietly, others running and playing. All of them are learning. All of them are thriving. All of them knew that their differences made them special. Tommy joined him at the window. "Hard to believe it all started with an angry visit to confront a teacher," he said. "It didn't start with anger," Marcus replied thoughtfully. "It started with hope. Hope that things could be different, that children like us deserve better. And now?" Marcus smiled, watching Maya collaborate with children from 3 different continents via holographic projection technology that LearnSphere had helped develop. "Now we know that being told you'll never amount to anything can be the first step toward changing everything." In the distance, a new teacher, one of Mrs. Henderson's last proteges, knelt beside a struggling student, her voice carrying across the playground. "You're not behind, sweetie. You're just taking a different path to the same beautiful destination." Marcus Chen, the boy who was once told he'd never amount to anything, had indeed amounted to something extraordinary. He'd amounted to a world where every child's potential was recognized, nurtured, and celebrated. That, he knew, was more than enough. Author's note: this story is dedicated to every teacher who sees potential instead of problems, every parent who believes in their child's unique gifts, and every student who has ever been told they'll never amount to anything. You will, you do. You are.